It's the end of the Spanish Civil War, and it's now safe for 37-year-old Joaquín Rodrigo to return to his homeland. But Spain is tired. Spain is hungry. Spain is desolate. The nation is now under the rule of dictator General Francisco Franco. After years of exile in Paris, Rodrigo has returned with his wife, Victoria. And amongst the few belongings he's brought back is a manuscript written in Braille. For Rodrigo's been blind ever since contracting diphtheria aged just 3 years old. His guitar concertos, dedicated to the 16th century royal palace and gardens built by Philip II. Aranjuez epitomized Spain's power during its golden age of art, music and culture, the Spain of Velázquez and Don Quixote, that time long ago when you could hear the first strums of the classical guitar repertoire. The strums which open the first movement are played rasgueado in a flamenco style. They drive against the natural pulse of the music, switching between 2-time and 3-time, a rhythmic effect called hemiola. It's a flamenco cliché which Leonard Bernstein borrowed for West Side Story's America. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Bows bounce gently, strings pluck lightly, and woodwinds sing sweetly. This is an orchestra of baroque proportions. No percussion and only 4 brass players mean the guitar is never overwhelmed. Staccato scales and articulated accents. This is Aranjuez in its baroque prime, when birds sang in its magnificent gardens and when water gushed from its ornamental fountains. Smell the fragrant flowers, taste the fruit of the trees, and hear the chirping crickets. It was in these gardens 6 years earlier that the Rodrigos had joyfully honeymooned. But the optimism fades in the second movement. A cor anglais plays a lament above an undulating bass. The guitar ornaments it with the flamenco inflections of the cante hondo, the deep song of Andalusia. It was long thought the inspiration behind the lyrical theme was the bombing of Guernica 2 years earlier. But it speaks to a far more personal pain for Rodrigo, for he played it night after night in the dark whilst Victoria lay in hospital during her first pregnancy, both of them grieving the loss of their child. An intense cadenza eerily imitates a sobbing human voice, a moment of vulnerable introspection in which Rodrigo asks God why this tragedy has befallen him. It builds to a violent cry for help. An impassioned reply by the orchestra soaks the depths of your soul. The guitar transitions from minor to major, a baroque effect called tierce de piquete, and an arpeggio floats upwards like the soul of the infant ascending to heaven. The final movement brings the elegant classicism of Italian-born Spanish composer Antonio Soler, the sort of 18th century dance the Bourbon monarchs might have hosted at Aranjuez. Royal fanfares blaze on muted trumpets in the neoclassical style of Stravinsky's Pulcinella. This is historicist nationalism, celebrating the glory of Spain's past in a manner acceptable to Franco's regime. It's no wonder that 50 years later, King Juan Carlos would bestow on the composer the royal title of Marquess of the Gardens of Aranjuez. The night before the 1940 premiere, Rodrigo and his guitarist were sharing a sleeping compartment on the train bound for Barcelona. But in the middle of the night, the guitarist woke the composer, saying he was terrified that nobody would hear him above the orchestra. Neither of them slept a wink, plagued by the realization that hardly anyone had dared write a guitar concerto for 150 years. For if the 18th century was the golden age of the classical guitar, the 19th century saw the disappearance of plucked strings from orchestras. That's because orchestras were expanding, instruments were getting louder, and concert halls were getting bigger. But Rodrigo's efforts paid off. The premiere was enormously successful, and the Concierto de Aranjuez is now the most famous guitar concerto ever composed. It's since inspired everyone from Led Zeppelin to Spinal Tap, Demis Roussos to Chick Corea. And when Miles Davis adapted it without the composer's permission, Rodrigo was furious. But he soon came round to the idea that this jazz version helped disseminate his concerto to a larger audience than he could ever have imagined. And for the blind composer, imagination was always more important than physical reality. For the truth is that the Aranjuez of the 1930s was depleted, dilapidated, and a shadow of its former glory. Yet when his own vision failed him, Rodrigo gave us an idealized vision of Spain's past. An age of elegance and aristocratic distinction mixed with fiery flamenco and baroque guitar. A nostalgic and rose-tinted vision of happier times when he and Victoria honeymooned in the palace gardens before the tragedy, trauma, and heartbreak of the Spanish Civil War. A memory of all he'd cherished and all he'd lost. Well, that's it, folks. Follow our channel, support us on Patreon, listen to the piece in full, and most importantly, enjoy classical music.